of course, and I will be taking up the comments, suggestions of the Noble Lord Scriven. I will address them. So may I thank all Noble Lords and the Noble Lord Farmer in particular for leading us in this debate today.
Yeah.
Motion for debate, the contribution of special needs schools and special education colleges. Baroness Monckton of Dallington Forest.
I declare my interest as set out in the register. My Lords, it is a privilege to lead this debate on a subject that concerns me both personally and professionally. Team Domenica, the charity that I started in my daughter's name, is, amongst other things, a specialist further education institution which provides training for students with learning disabilities with the aim of transforming their lives through paid employment. There are 130 specialist further education colleges, typically catering for people with more complex disabilities, whose needs cannot be met in a mainstream setting. However, there is no definition of such needs. The needs of my daughter, Domenica, as a young woman with Down syndrome, would not necessarily be described as complex, but she is one of a large cohort for whom a mainstream setting is not and cannot be reasonably adjusted. Large general further education colleges, typically with over 3,500 students, are not always the best environments for these individuals. These colleges, incorporated under the 1992 Education Act, were reclassified by the Office of National Statistics in 2022 as public sector bodies, and as such are out of scope of the pernicious new VAT policy, a tax on learning that we have never known in this country. However, specialist further education colleges are being treated as private schools, although all the students have an EHC plan and are therefore publicly funded. Yet these colleges will still be liable for VAT if they have pupils aged 16. As I have stated previously in your Lordship's House, I hope that this is just an oversight and one that can be remedied as soon as possible. Several of our candidates at Team Domenica have come from mainstream settings. One of them said, "At Team Domenica, I am treated fairly, with respect, more like an adult. I used to fret a lot at the last place. I don't feel that here." And one of our parents wrote, "When my daughter started with you, she needed one-to-one support, but now she's a very much more independent young lady. She's learnt to fail without feeling like a failure. So if she doesn't meet a target, she tries again and again and again. And eventually, she does reach the target. It has been an incredible journey." These specialist colleges, which offer a holistic approach, are such an important part of the education system, but are all too frequently seen as an expensive adjunct. The alternative for this disenfranchised group is a world of isolation, and institutions like ours give them a chance to emerge from that bleak prospect. Some of the larger general further education colleges cater for more than 3,000 students with special educational needs, and they do a wonderful job. However, they are coming under increasing pressure to take students whose needs they cannot meet, which is a misuse of the duty to admit. Students are being placed against the advice of these colleges as there are behaviours that they know they will not be able to deal with. These decisions are bad all round. They're bad for the college, but of course particularly bad for the young people involved. Government tends to have a focus on the general further education colleges, often to the exclusion of other types of provision. This can be frustrating, and we see this in the apprenticeship sector, where around 70% of the provision comes from private training providers, yet they are frequently overlooked in policy discussions. So I just would like to emphasise the role that specialist independent institutions play, and to point out that general further education colleges cannot, as they themselves admit, meet all the needs. Of course, we need both inclusive mainstream and a thriving specialist sector. In fact, I'd suggest that specialist colleges not only contribute to the education sector, but also play a critical role in the skills agenda, particularly in supporting people into employment. One area of concern is apprenticeship access. SEN students who are capable of and keen to pursue apprenticeships can be disadvantaged by the requirement to achieve level 1 in maths and English. These subjects used to be embedded in the programme, but are now standalone qualifications. People with learning disabilities can do the practical aspects of training, but for many, the academic side is completely beyond them. Abstract is not what they do. And the result is that some students are unable to pursue this apprenticeship route, even though they excel in their practical skills. Why can't we just value the skills that they have and businesses need, and let them develop at their own pace, making their own unique contribution? The system is setting up people to fail and undermining their hard-won self-confidence. Incidentally, I also see this in the jewellery business, where I have made my career. Apprentices for silversmithing and jewellery making are very hard to come by without adding these unnecessary qualifications. Superb craftsmanship is its own language, which requires no translation, and certainly not an English exam. The government has announced some flexibility for people with special educational needs, allowing an exemption if they can demonstrate an evidence judgment of reaching entry level 3. Yes, this is a positive step, but I am concerned that the process still remains too unwieldy and complex and costly, which would continue to disadvantage these students and also add unnecessary burden on the college. And believe me, we have enough already. The tribunal system is not working. 96% of parents who are turned down for an EHCP by the local authority win their tribunals, but at a huge financial and emotional cost. Unfortunately, the process is protracted, and some parents cave in under the pressure. They don't even get to tribunal. Or if they do, it is too late for the start of the academic year. This, therefore, is a year's savings for the local authority, and all too frequently, a year without education for that young person. In the academic year 22 to 23, just 136 of the nearly 8,000 appeals that went to a hearing upheld decisions by councils. A study by Pro Bono Economics estimated councils wasted 46.2 million on tribunals in 21-22. And an inevitable consequence of VAT on fees will be a significant rise in tribunal cases as parents struggle to find the right setting for their learning disabled children. It will be the sharp-elbowed who have the best chance. And yet again, it will be the most vulnerable, the isolated, those parents who struggle to fill in the forms, who will be forgotten and fall beneath the radar. I think the government should commit to an independent review of the VAT policy after 6 months. There has not been a full consultation on the plans or of their impact on SEND provision. Last year, the Department of Education had to pay the courts more than 13 million so it could deliver these SEND tribunals, double that of the year before, and will undoubtedly rise much further as a result of the impending education tax. The system is broken and unnecessarily adversarial. Kate Fole, a SEND spokesman for the County Councils Network, said there desperately needs to be action at a governmental level to ensure local authorities and schools have the funding required to meet the needs of all children and young people. Councils are already struggling to fund SEND provision. The Local Government Association and the County Council Network published a report in July noting that SEND costs will increase to 12 billion by 2025, having doubled over the past decade. They say this puts council finances on a cliff edge. We are in a divide and rule situation, where local authorities with a statutory duty to fund are at odds with the providers, and the providers end up fighting on all fronts. I have first-hand experience of this, and it wastes an enormous amount of time and energy. We need to work together, and I know that the noble Baroness, the Minister, is fully aware of how important this is, and I thank her for her intervention last month for us. The current high needs funding system came into place in the academic year 2013-14, which is when it was decided that local authorities should both undertake the assessments and provide the funding, thus becoming poacher and gamekeeper, a clear conflict of interest. Before that, assessment and funding decisions were handled separately. The Department for Education maintains that bringing them together was necessary because of spiralling costs, with needs being identified without any thought of the money involved. But it has not published any data that demonstrates that the separation of these two processes was causing the spiralling costs, and not just increased need. Nor has it commented on the fact that despite bringing the two together, costs have spiralled anyway. And what it has done is made it much, much harder for families to get an assessment, because the councils know that once they have assessed, they then have a statutory duty to provide. The Secretary of State for Education told parents that the SEND system is fundamentally broken. She has also said, "We are serious about reform. I am determined to do it." She added, "We would like to do this on a cross-party basis and listen to parents and staff." I stand here in that spirit of cooperation and determined that above all else, the interests of learning disabled people are accorded the highest priority. When I look at the lives of our many candidates post-college in paid work and see the difference it has made, how much it means to them and to their families, how much it impacts their well-being and sense of self-worth, it makes me even more determined to fight on their behalf. And I will continue to raise my voice in your Lordship's House on behalf of people with learning disabilities. One of our candidates died last month, in his early 20s. He was part of our story, and we became his. His father told us that he would be buried in his work uniform, because it meant the world to him that he had found a job, a life beyond his family, and in the community where we all belong, and where his life lived to the limit of its capacity, touched so many, fulfilling his potential. And what more could one possibly want for any of our children or anybody with a learning disability?
The question is that this motion be agreed to.
My Lords, first of all, can I thank and congratulate Baroness Monckton on for bringing the topic to our attention and for the way she spoke. I was lucky enough to hear her contribution as a maiden speech, which was some weeks ago, where she addressed this issue as well. And there is no better advocate, not just for speaking about this issue, but actually doing something about it as well, which is quite an important extra. So I'm very grateful that we've had this opportunity to discuss this today. And if I may say to my noble friend, the Minister, I hope the Government may provide time during the Department's consideration for the future of SEN policy for us to have further debates and make further contributions. The noble lady talked a lot about the specialist colleges, and that is important, because she's absolutely right. The alternative to that is staying at home. It's not a poor school or an inadequate school that actually gets you out of the house. It's staying at home. And I think we've let down young adults with disabilities for many, many years. It's as though we assume life stops when they reach the age of the end of compulsory schooling. So I appreciate that. However, I wanted to start off on just two more positive points. If you look at specialist schools, special schools, I think there's been a transformation over the last 20 to 30 years. And I think it's worth making note of that, because it shows that progress can be made. In my lifetime, the law described this group of people as ineducable. That's what it said in the Education Act, that they were ineducable. And now when you go to special schools or go to specialist colleges, you You see young boys and girls, young men and women who are doing what anybody in any school does, working hard, hoping for better things, playing with their friends, sharing things with their teachers and family, and wanting to get on and wanting to be part of society. So we have made improvements, and most of all what's changed is our own understanding of what can be achieved. It's society, it's education, it's politicians, it's all of us who's put the lid in the past on the achievements of this group. And at least now when you see some really excellent special schools and specialist colleges, you see that there can be change, but there's a lot more to be done as well. As a second area where I just wanted to point out good things that I've always taken from this sector. When you go into a special school, you try to work out what's different than going into a mainstream school. I think to me, it's something like this. The teachers are very well trained in their specialism. They know what they're talking about and they're practiced in delivering that. When you look around the staffing, it's not just teachers, it's physiotherapists, it's play leaders, it's classroom, it's assistants, it's people with a whole range of professional skills trying to meet the needs of the child. They invariably have close links with parents. And special schools are interesting in that social class doesn't matter. Social class doesn't choose children who attend these schools. So you very often get socially mixed schools. And when you look at the children, each one of them has a tailored programme that's there to meet their needs. And they have partnerships beyond the school. So if you look at that, teachers who know their subject and can deliver it, working with a range of other professionals so that a range of needs can be met, with very precious and close links with parents, working with the community that wants to support, is actually a definition of what we should have in every school, special school or mainstream school. And when I was a minister in the education department, a lot of the work we did in terms of classroom assistance, in terms of extra administrative help for schools, in terms of using the school as a location for people with other skills, in my mind, was modelled on the best of special schools. So they have a lot to teach all the other schools that are in mainstream education. But there's no doubt that this is troubled times for the whole of the SEN sector, and there will be opportunities to discuss that. I just wanted to turn my comments to that now. For doing though, on special schools, there are a number of policy challenges which I would perhaps ask the Minister to reflect on. First of all, I very much welcomed the announcement of the Prime Minister at Labour Party conference about level 2 apprenticeships. I think that will help this group. But for all the good that goes on with special schools, the assessment and the qualifications framework in which they're asked to work just does not meet their needs. I chair the Public Services Committee, and we've recently produced a report on the transition from education to work for young people with disabilities. And the story is of doing well in schools and it being blocked from there on in. Part of that's expectations, but a lot of it is the qualifications they're encouraged to study are not fit for purpose in terms of moving them to the next stage of their lives. And just two more points. I've met a lot of people who, with special needs children, who think we ought not to have special schools at all, and that the inclusion debate ought to be such that every child's needs can be met in a mainstream community school. It's not a view I take, at all, but I think we ought to acknowledge that that debate across the sector, all children with special needs, where they're taught, is a live one, and I think we have to work it out. In my mind, the easy decisions are those with needs that can't be met in mainstream schools should be in special school, and if they can be included in mainstream school and then their parents want it, every effort ought to be made to remove any barriers that may exist, and that may be as little as physical obstacles. But it's the ones in between that are at the borders, where there's not agreement whether special schools or mainstream schools would be appropriate. And I think that's where the debate's difficult. And that's where the numbers of people with the HCP plans who are trying to get to special schools and the authorities think their needs might be met in mainstream education, that's where the difficulties lie, and I think that's where we let down a lot of children. What I'm absolutely sure about is no one should have to want a special school because it's a poor mainstream school that they're trying to turn their back on. So it should be because the child needs the special school, not because we've not got mainstream schools who are catering as well as they can be for special needs children. This is the last point I wanted to make. We haven't got this right, and it's not easy. If you look across our 24,000 schools that make up our school system, we've got a very, very, very small number of special schools. Most of them are mainstream schools. And we've never been sure what the role of the special schools in the whole education system should be. But think about it. All the talent, all the highly qualified teachers, all the experience is in the special schools. And what we've always tried to do is to find a way of using their expertise across all schools to benefit all children who have a special needs. And the solutions that we've come up over the years, whether it be co-locating special schools on the same campus as mainstream schools, whether it be having units in mainstream schools without specialism, whether it's been having teachers who move from one school to the other. I've seen excellent examples of all, but nowhere do I see a cohesive, coherent plan about how special schools and what they have to offer sits easily in the whole education system so that we can meet the needs of those who have needs that can be met in special schools, those who don't, and many in between that just want the best of both.
So I congratulate the noble Baroness Monckton on an excellent introductory speech to this debate and on acquiring this debate and on just championing the issues of special educational needs and disability so effectively before and since she came into this house. I also, it's an honour to follow Baroness Morris of Yardley when she was Secretary of State for Education in 2001 too. You can see the wisdom and experience that flows from her in her speech, and it's an honour to follow that. I also want to thank Ashmount Special School in Leicestershire for helpful information they gave me ahead of this debate. I'll come at the contribution special needs schools and specialist education colleges make to education by referring to another often overlooked part of the system, namely the parents. Across the school system, school-level factors account for just 20% of the variation in pupils' attainment. Pupil-level factors, including the home and the community children come from, account for the balance 80%. Half of that 80% is determined by family factors, particularly what parents do. So working hand in glove with parents, wherever possible, can make or break whether children fulfil their potential and flourish whilst at school. This is particularly the case where children have special needs. The closer one is to a family with a special needs child, the more one realises how profoundly every member is affected, especially where those needs are at a high enough level to make them eligible for a place at a special school. Parents and siblings' own needs can be considered by special schools in a far more developed and bespoke way than mainstream settings permit. Far from cosseting them, this whole family support is indispensable if special needs children are to attend, engage and meet appropriately ambitious educational expectations. To quote one special needs teacher, "You know it's going to pay off if you are supportive to the families, to the parents, because working together is so important for this child's emotional and behavioural regulation, which makes their education possible." Many schools also take steps to help parents build a support network with each other. The House of Lords Library briefing identified frequent contact with parents or carers and close tracking of children's progress as one of the important benefits of attending special education. That contact often starts before a child has had their first day at school. Early home visits help to identify the whole family's needs and particularly their psychological state. When children start at special school, there is awareness that parents are on a grief curve which needs to be respected and accommodated. Trauma, emotion, stress about things that might seem insignificant but are highly significant to them. First, many had to fight to get the child into special school in the first place and disagree with professionals, which is rarely easy. It's an early priority to relieve anxiety and assure them they no longer need to convince anyone their child cannot be in mainstream. Second, they are often experts in their child's needs, including their medical needs, and fear something being missed in case it means the difference, quite literally, between life and death. Many special needs children have had life-threatening conditions requiring long and complex operations. Parents have handed their children over to anaesthetists and surgeons, unsure if they will survive. As many conditions are ongoing, sending a special needs child to school is far from straightforward. Easing families' burdens can include helping parents fill in the complex paperwork for school transportation where needed, and also the disability living allowance. Such extra cash is essential, as it's very hard for both parents to work when care needs are so high. But forms can seem overwhelming when time is cut short by myriad health appointments and associated administration. It is not unusual for profoundly disabled children to have 2 hospital appointments a week, which might be in different cities. A child's education, health and care plan routinely requires special schools to work with multiple professionals, such as speech and language and occupational therapists, social workers and medical consultants. They write letters to GPs on the family's behalf and make referrals to child and adolescent mental health services. Many special needs children are doubly incontinent for genuine medical reasons, and teachers literally get their hands dirty by providing personal care. Some schools allow parents to use a child's direct payments to fund a staff member to give respite care on a Saturday afternoon or after school. Their deep involvement in health and social care means teachers are effectively triple hatting in a way a mainstream teacher would find impossible in a much larger class size, where they are required to be driven by data and development deadlines. Ministers have said they will improve mainstream inclusivity and pick up special needs earlier. But does the government agree that we will always need special schools? And to reiterate, parents are vital to the education sector. Teachers with experience across both settings refer to a significant lack of understanding in mainstream about what life is like for parents. Will the Minister confirm that this will also be an area for improvement?
My Lords, I also strongly welcome this debate and would like to congratulate Baroness Monckton for her eloquent speech. In contributing, I would like to focus on the general situation facing specialist colleges in a rather broader sense, so including but not confined to those that we think of as special needs students, but catering to small specialist groups of students of various different kinds. And I want to urge the Minister to ensure that this population and this type of institution receives more targeted and more coherent attention and support at national level than has been the case. Obviously, much of this debate will focus on the large and important group of children and young people with learning difficulties for whom the mainstream curriculum is unsuitable, or who struggle to cope with formal settings. And we know there is a real crisis here, especially in catering to those with complex multiple needs. However, there's also an important and diverse group of students for whom the issue is not that they struggle, and will probably always struggle, with the mainstream curriculum or the classroom environment, but rather that they belong to a rather small group with special and distinctive requirements, but which is widely spread across the country. So in any given area, there will be only a few of them. This means that we need specialist institutions with wide and national catchment areas. We actually do quite well at school level, albeit largely because of a legacy of charitable and privately established institutions. And central government has then done a pretty good job of recognising and incorporating these into the national school system. I grew up near one of the most famous, the Mary Hare School for the Deaf, which sends pupils on to a range of extremely demanding academic courses at university level. We have
music schools, such as the Manure School or Cheetham School, where students, more than 90% of students, get financial assistance, including through the DFE's Music and Dance Scheme. But where things are not going so well is at college level. Education does not end with school, less and less so. We need to recognise areas of specialisation that cannot be offered in each and every locality or even region, but which are nonetheless vital. And we can't just rely here on our inheritance of a few well-established institutions, such as the Royal National College for the Blind, or indeed the wonderful-sounding college that Baroness Monckton has helped to establish. And we need to think more coherently and creatively about what sort of specialist college we need for this older age group, and how they should be funded and how they should be run. Noble lords may know the sad story of the specialist national colleges. This was actually a very good idea, trying to create national institutions with specific areas of expertise. But although lots of money was put into capital, there was no coherent thinking about how they would recruit and be funded. And I remember visiting one early on and being horrified that they were expected to operate and to recruit and fund themselves as though they were just another local FE college with a particular small catchment area. And not surprisingly, most of the national colleges have now closed. We don't make clear provision for scarce and valued crafts and trades with small workforces. Training in some, like musical instrument making or clock making, has clung on by being turned into full-fledged residential honours degrees in a couple of institutions. But the lack of national planning is evident. College-based courses have closed. In other countries, we would have apprenticeships with specialist colleges providing the off-the-job training, and there is no mechanism somehow in our central government for thinking about and providing these. Another group which suffers from being small and low profile is our rural population. Agricultural colleges, land-based colleges, which have to offer residential accommodation, are often struggling. There was supposed to be a proper review of these colleges a few years back. If it happened, it certainly never saw the light of day outside DFE. Specialist adult colleges survive in London, outside just northern, clinging on by its fingertips. We have a construction skills crisis, and only one of our specialist construction colleges is left standing. I think all of this has relevance because what it points up is that at the college level, there is no real mechanism for thinking about specialist groups, of which one of the most important will be young people with learning difficulties and physical challenges, but they are not the only ones, and their colleges are not catered for because we have no proper national mechanism for thinking about such specialist provision. So I would like to urge the Minister to ensure that within her department more focused attention is paid to looking at what national provision is needed for post-school college opportunities. I would also like to raise a very specific issue because I think it speaks to the current absence of dedicated attention. Many specialised colleges are not standard public sector institutions, and many rightly offer qualifications ranging right through to levels 4, 5 and 6, which is higher education. And at present there seems to be real confusion on how the new VAT requirements for private school fees apply to higher level qualifications in institutions that also offer lower level ones. And this issue has been raised specifically with me and with other noble lords with respect to the Dance and Drama Awards. But I think the lack of clarity speaks to this general point that I'm trying to make. Our higher education sector also has a multiplicity of many different institutions, and as far as I know, there has been no discussion of introducing VAT on fees in higher education, which would of course feed through to student loans. But my sense is that the lack of clarity on what is happening in specialist institutions, which would of course have a knock-on effect, comes from the fact that nobody is in a position to demand and get clear guidance. So I would like to ask the Minister, obviously, to please ensure that the Government clarifies this particular challenge, but I would also like to make a much more ambitious request. I think that for what we normally think of as the special needs population, but also for these other small, spread, critical, specialist and often needy groups. We need to think far more coherently about specialist college provision across the country as a whole. Thank you.
My Lords, I am also grateful to Baroness Monckton for securing this debate, and also I'd like to offer my admiration for her commitment and eloquence in this field. I formerly served as the chair of the National Society as the lead bishop for education, and in that capacity was given a very wide view of the provision, brilliant provision made where specialist schools and colleges exist. I can point to such a school in North Wiltshire where teachers were so dedicated they were prepared to face a 150-mile round trip each day in order to serve in that particular and special place. I am the bishop for the L'Arche community in the UK, and with the Church of England, L'Arche seeks to live as part of its vision a desire to educate for community and living well together, and that seems to me something that's a special part of any school, or should be, and not least in our special schools. With Baroness Morris, I'd want to say that I want to see an integrated ecology of special schools and mainstream schools. I think that one of the things when I was Bishop of Ely, we won a bid with a DFE to have a single campus with a free school and in partnership with a special school also to be on the same site. And I appreciate there are its expense issues in relation to that, but it seems to me to be an excellent model of an integrated approach. I understand the Minister in the other place this morning talked about wanting to have most children with special needs in mainstream schools so they can be with their friends. Well, actually, of course, if you had an integrated campus, you not only have friends meeting together, but siblings perhaps in the same setting as well. But we can't get away from the facts, which are, as I understand it, at the moment, 150,000 young people across England attend specialist schools and colleges, but there are 1.9 million children and young people who have special educational needs. That's a figure identified in January this year. And the special schools that we have doing a marvellous job under huge pressure are systematically underfunded and under-resourced. In its report published today, I think, the National Audit Office calculates the demand for education and healthcare plans has increased by 140% since 2015. There's simply not enough places, and this needs to be addressed in the way that, as Lord Farmer has eloquently spoken about, the way in which individualised and complex support can't just be provided in blanket terms in mainstream schools. Nor can mainstream schools provide what I have witnessed broadly, the key importance of college places for people with disability up to the age of 25, and all that's already been said about how important that is for accessing employment, but also, again, as part of the vision for education that the Church of England sustains, about how we exercise the proper understanding of the rare dignity of all people, and not least those living with disability. The deficit in terms of special needs education in mainstream schools is also very clear. I was recently opening a new building at one of our 142 church schools in the Diocese of Lincoln in Spalding, St John Spalding, and the school is experiencing a serious rise in the numbers of children with profound SEND needs, and Claire Robinson, the head teacher, emphasised to me the impossible position that her staff face when SEND funding is entirely insufficient to cover the cost to employ the requisite personnel with training and expertise. And this is also where specialist schools come into play, because, of course, specialist schools can actually send out experts to support mainstream schools in the delivery of special education in those other places. So Claire and her colleagues have gone to extraordinary lengths to support their students, and this has involved taking, for instance, a new multi-purpose area to serve as both a kids' club and a space for interventions with SEND pupils. I saw this for myself. It's a marvellous development, but the measure merely scratches the surface of what is needed because they can only cater for the youngest students in the school in this way. So I plead for the government, who's going to make sure that special schools not only continue and grow, but also continue to offer the specialist medical care and occupational and physical therapy, the small class sizes, and all the activities and bespoke support which provides and ensures a consistency of care for children and mitigated stresses for families. I've said that the Church is committed to educating for dignity and respect, and I hope that in the that it's possible, given how church schools are in such demand, that it might be possible for the government to consider the Church being allowed to engage in developing special schools, not least with falling school rolls, the reallocation of church school buildings that could become church-based specialist schools, which would help to improve, I hope, the access for children in any kind of need. I submit that denying children and young people with special needs access to the specialist support they need is in fact a fundamental issue and affects everyone's human rights. And I'm delighted the government is determined to continue to expand in this area, and I look forward to full developments brought to us very closely in the near future.
My Lords, I would like to thank Baroness Monckton for organising this important debate. She is clearly such a passionate and moving advocate for her cause, and in fact a very, very dear friend, my best friend in fact, who is a parent of 2 children with special education needs, has just messaged me to say, watching your opening comments, I feel tearful that this has been debated in such a serious, sensitive, meaningful way. It is also very timely, as has just been mentioned. The National Audit Office has just published a report which says that the special educational needs system is simply not delivering for children and their families, and very importantly, nor is it preventing local authorities from facing significant financial risks. But let me begin by paying tribute to the many excellent specialist schools and colleges across the country and their staff. They do such vital work for children and young people of all ages and all backgrounds, many of whom who have complex needs. As we've just heard so eloquently from Baroness Monckton, they provide a safe, compassionate, respectful, and we forget the word fun, environment as well for the individual to develop and learn, and they are often a lifeline for parents and families. Many also have a real focus on practical vocational skills to help equip a young adult for future life and get into the workplace and get a job, which is so important. Now, when we have these discussions about children and young people with special educational needs, and I say this as well as somebody who is a journalist, and I think my profession can be very guilty of this as well, we often talk about them like they're a different species from a different planet. We often use very negative, hostile language, calling them a problem or a ticking time bomb. But they are human beings, just like anyone else, and they are someone's precious and much-loved child or grandchild. We should also want every child to have the best chance to make the most of themselves. Not only is it the right thing to do, it's the right thing for wider society. We want people to be able to find suitable and sustainable work and to make a contribution on a very basic human level. We want people to be able to build a good life. But we also know that many children and young people just cannot access all these specialist facilities, and that's why, like many others, I would like to move the debate onto what's happening in mainstream education, because so many children with special educational needs who end up in a specialist institution will have often started out in mainstream education. So that part of the jigsaw cannot be ignored. Now, we know that there are around 1.9 million children who have special educational needs, but we also know that this figure is probably much higher in real life. And whether you like that figure or not, we have to accept that there is real demand for special education needs, and we all have a stake in improving the situation, because at the moment the system just isn't working. I also think it is unhelpful, if I may say this, to make comments like one of the contenders who is vying to be the next leader of the opposition, who recently endorsed a pamphlet which argued, if you have a neurodiversity diagnosis and you are a child, you may well get better treatment or equipment at schools. And I'm afraid that idea is woefully out of touch with the lived reality and the lived experience that so many parents face. Most parents in this situation are absolutely exhausted. They are ground down. They are tearing their hair out, trying to navigate and battle their way through this very punishing, broken system. As we have heard, trying to get an educational and health care plan can become a full-time job. And I know so many parents, so many of my friends, most of them mums, I have to say, who've actually had to stop working in order to battle away on behalf of their child. Now, that is a loss of income to that family. That's a loss of a job to that parent. And of course, that's a loss to the economy as well. But what about the parents who don't have the time, the stomach, or the ability to take on the system? Do their kids simply get left behind? That cannot be right. Now, having spoken to some parents and some really excellent teachers in preparation for this debate, here are a few ideas that they have put forward, and I hope my honourable friend, the Minister, will sort of think about these. Of course, it's been mentioned before, but so many people have said that transport is absolutely critical. It sounds like a small thing, but it makes all the difference. It's something that can really help get children to school. And we actually, in this chamber just yesterday, very importantly discussed the issue of absenteeism yesterday, and we all agreed across the House that it's so important to get children into school. Teaching assistants is something that also came up in my conversations. Again, they can make a massive difference to support teachers and pupils in schools. Perhaps now is the time to start treating teaching assistants with greater status, treating them more like graduate jobs, giving them that greater respect, maybe paying them a bit more so that they could really specialise in special education needs, for example, speech and language therapy. We also need to have more resources in mainstream schools, and indeed some very good work has been done on secondary schools, but we must focus on primary schools as well. Early detection and intervention is vital, particularly at Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2, in helping to identify, and this of course will help children and their families. We also know that better mental health provision is so important here, and we know that waiting lists have really soared post-COVID. Getting mental health services into school is so important. Making them hubs is very important. I know that that's something that this new government is keen to do, which I'm sure we will all welcome. I will end on this note. We all know that the fiscal climate is incredibly difficult right now, and we of course are waiting for this much anticipated budget. But we simply can't afford to not fix the system. But it's not all about throwing more money. It's how it is used. As one excellent SEN teacher told me, money alone will not fix this. The right people and having the right people in place is what is going to make a difference. So this is a really important debate, and I hope there can be agreement across the House that the hallmark of a good society is the welfare and the education of all our children.
Yeah, well done.
My Lords, special educational needs SEN and special education needs and disabilities SEN covers a wide variety of needs, including dyslexia and autism. 2 out of 4 of our children are dyslexic, and our younger son, Josh, it was spotted when he was in kindergarten school by a teacher. His next school gave up on him by the age of 7. He then went to a specialist school, Fairley House, across the river, where they tried. And then he went on to Bruin Abbey at the age of 9, a boarding school near Oxford, where they specialised in dyslexia and dyspraxia. He entered that school barely able to read, write, enumerate, couldn't even hold his pencil. He left 4 years later, coming top of the school in his common entrance, and scraped into one of the best schools in the world, whether you like it or not, Eton. And at that school, where they mark you out of the whole year, he came 262 out of 262 in his exams in his first couple of years, bottom of the school. With special need, one-to-one help at that school, and everything else it offered, he left Eton with 3 A stars in his A-levels and entered the London School of Economics and has just graduated with a first-class degree in international history. Why was that possible? One, as the noble lady Baroness Hazarika has said, early detection, that teacher who spotted it when he was in kindergarten, and 2, intensive help, which was provided to him at Fairley House, at Bruen Abbey, and at Eton. What is the government doing to encourage those 2 things? The early detection, training every teacher in this country to be able to spot dyslexia or dyspraxia, and to provide the special needs. I qualified as a chartered accountant with Ernst & Young here in London with EY, and they produced a report in conjunction with Made by Dyslexia called The Value of Dyslexia, Dyslexic Capability in Organizations of the Future. And a couple of quotes in there. Steve Hatch of Facebook, dyslexic thinkers are often able to see connections that others may miss and create narratives that they can simplify complex products or tasks. Another quote from Johnny Goodwin, who I know dyslexia should not be viewed as a disadvantage, but a strength. And the report summarizes that the top dyslexic strengths trending competencies in all industries they are exceptional at active learning, originality, spatial abilities, idea generation and reasoning abilities, creativity, social influence, innovation, and leadership. And I've seen this firsthand. And I'm privileged to know one of my heroes, Dame Stephanie Shirley. We call her Steve. She is the biggest benefactor of autism in the world and has set up a school in memory of her son, who was severely autistic, the Priors Court School. And when I asked her, what is it that her school does that helps autistic children, she said, specialized education help mainstream schools to support autistic learners. The inclusive expertise, the special schools often act as centers of excellence, a holistic support. They integrate education with mental and physical therapies, reducing call on public health services, vocational training, advocacy for student rights, raising awareness of rights and needs, assistive technology, specialist schools pilot of the use of assistive technology, parental involvement, support the child within the family, structured environment, what is essential in special education in good practice generally. And she is 90 years old and is still going strong. So by the end of 23-24, now Baroness Hazarika gave a figure of 1.9, I have a figure of 1.6 million children in England with SEND, and of these, 434,000 had an education, health and care plan, with autism being one of the most commonly needed situations. I'd like to thank the noble Baroness Monckton for leading this debate and for her excellent opening speech. And you know, special education settings, if you have smaller classes, specialized staff, tailored equipment, focus on life skills training, 90% of parents whose children attend special schools feel that their children are well supported, compared with only 59% of parents with children in mainstream schools. So we need more special schools. £2.6 billion has been spent by the government on SEND provision. Surely we need to spend more. May I ask the noble lady, the Minister, that we need to spend more on this. And of course, by May 2023, 2/3 of special schools were operating at or above capacity, leading to further strain on the sector. And this is very timely. On October the 21st, just a few days ago, the Financial Times, there was an article, "The Funding Crisis Threatens England's Special Needs Education." And in this article, it says the Department of Education said it would focus on fixing the foundations of local government, providing long-term stability through multi-year funding settlements, and ending the need for councils to spend time and money bidding for pots of government cash. However, the number of children with EHC plans in England rising to more than 434,000 over the past 8 years, surging SEND deficits leave many councils with near impossible choices to meet their obligations, what the government recognises. And Sam Friedman, a former government education policy advisor, said that the rapid rise in EHC plans reflected a decade of cuts to other SEND support in mainstream schools, such as specialist teachers and occupational therapists. This has led to a vicious cycle in educational funding as parents turn to EHC plans to get support. And the lack of early years intervention, a lack of other kinds of provision, means that the only way for parents to obtain help and funding is by obtaining a statement, which means more money is sucked into plans, so there's less money for everything else. Demand has far outstripped the capacity of state-funded special schools, forcing councils to pay much more expensive privately run alternatives. And the Department of Education said that children with SEND had been let down by the system and was determined to tackle the issues with better inclusivity and expertise within mainstream schools. And Friedman said any solution must involve giving parents and other options in seeking a SEND plan for their children, although he admitted this would be challenging at a time of fiscal belt tightening. Surely the government realises that the solution is more funding for government schools overall, including for special needs schools. And my lords, I conclude with this. I call him my noble friend. My noble friend, Lord Hacking, has written a letter to the Prime Minister just yesterday about the issue of VAT on independent school fees proposals. And of course, this affects all the private schools as well that specialise in special needs. And I quote from Lord Hacking's letter with his permission: "It is true from December 2018 to December 2023 that there's been a 20.4% increase in independent school fees, but this is over a 6-year period during which the average yearly increase was 3.4%. Similarly, since 2005, there's been an increase in independent school fees of 77.2%, but the average yearly increase from December 2005 to December 2023 has been 4%. So this actually is complete nonsense, he says. It's therefore complete nonsense to conclude that this provides the evidence of the ability of independent school parents having coped with these small yearly increases in fees, often being matched by increases in their wages. And he says it will cause great damage to the government, which you lead, to have launched a policy which provides no benefit to the state sector and much suffering by pupils and their parents, of ordinary working people whose only sin has been, at their considerable cost, seeking to provide for their children a better education."
My Lords, I declare my interest as per my register and as a councillor in Central Bedfordshire. I'd like to thank my noble friend, the Baroness Monckton, for this debate on the important contribution that specialist schools and colleges make to SEND education. But I want to focus a bit more on the broader landscape and the valued role that they play as part of the SEND system. As many noble lords have mentioned, the SEND system is failing. It's failing children, it's failing parents, failing schools, and it's failing local government. We have a system that is hugely expensive, complex, adversarial, and delivers poor outcomes. Now, I say system, but I'm not sure it is a system, and that is the problem. It's not operating as a system. While there are many good parts, and as many lords have mentioned, some great special schools, and individuals who work hard to deliver great outcomes, and parents who do the best to support their children, there isn't a coherent system. Not all parts are working together cooperatively and coherently to achieve the best outcomes for children. The facts speak for themselves. Since 2014, we've seen a more than doubling in the number of children with EHCPs. The National High Needs Block for SEND has increased from around 5 billion to nearly 10 billion. Councils are spending on top of that a nearly additional £1 billion. School transport costs have ballooned. The cumulative high needs deficit has risen from 300 million 5 years ago to nearly over 3 billion now. And despite investment in special schools, this has not kept pace with demand. I think one of the noble lords said a demand increase of 140%. We've seen a 51% increase in placements in state-funded special schools and a 164% increase in non-maintained special schools over the last 10 years. This leaves those special schools under huge pressure. Despite the increase in numbers and a significant increase in investment, there has not been improved outcomes. If anything, it has got worse. Young people with SEN achievement at level 2 at 19 are declining faster than the mainstream average, and other indicators such as employment have not improved, despite some great examples, as you mentioned, in certain places. And a survey by ISOS of people working in the system 97% said the system is not working well in supporting children and young people with SEND to achieve good outcomes. The system is broken. We have moved to an exclusive rather than inclusive system, with more pupils attending specialist schools, which is appropriate for some, but not necessarily for everyone, often some distance from where they live, increasing numbers of specialist payments, and as the noble Baroness Morris pointed out, an alarming increase in the number of having home education with specialist bespoke packages. A system that is based on legal frameworks that has driven a complete lack of trust. Schools find themselves lacking resources and specialist support for SEND pupils, and hence are incentivised to get an EHCP to get more resources or to offload a high-resource pupil. Parents seeking support for their child find this is not available and can only be achieved through an EHCP plan. As the noble Baroness Hazariki mentioned, the difficulties of navigating this complex process. Local authorities have responsibility, but neither the resources nor the levers to support SEND pupils, leading to rationing. Lack of capacity in mental health support, educational psychiatrists, speech and language therapists, specialist SENCOs, and so forth, to deliver what is needed. A legal framework that is vague and open to interpretation, that encourages an adversarial and legally based approach with prescriptive plans that are delivered through legal argument rather than one that is focused on children. A system that is opaque and hard to navigate for parents. The pushing of pupils to special schools means there is a shortage of capacity for those who most need it, and the financial costs are simply unsustainable. In short, a system with perverse incentives that has led to a vicious circle that encourages a legally based specialist approach, sucking resources away from much needed support as part of mainstream, and to enable those needing more specialist support to receive it, as my noble colleague Baroness Monckton pointed out. Now, it can be done differently, and it does happen in some parts of the country, and there are many good examples in Europe, so it's not impossible. We know how to fix this system. We need a system where inclusion is the norm, where parents and schools do not need to have an EHC to get the support they need, where local authorities don't just have the responsibility, but have the resources and the levers to deliver, where there is clear understanding for all parties what support to expect and the confidence that it will be delivered. A system that does not require resorting to legal process, and a clear focus on delivering improved outcomes. Now, this will not be easy, not because it's technically or financially difficult. As I said earlier, there are successful models that exist, but because there is a complete breakdown of trust in the current system from all parties that are understandably very protective of what they have. This mould needs to be broken, and it needs to be done on a cross-party basis. Fortunately, there are good proposals on the table as to what can be done, as outlined in some of the proposals from the previous government SEND review and the recently published ISOS report commissioned by the LGA and CCN. What do we need? Government should set out a new national ambition based on two core principles of promoting inclusion in education and in preparing young people for adult life. A clear framework that describes levels and types of needs, including reform of the statutory framework, so that it is clear what support should be available for each level of need, and while mainstream, whether that's mainstream or in special schools. A clear framework for how partners will work together, aligning responsibilities with delivery and aligning transition points, and including, as both the noble Baroness Morris and the noble Prelate Bishop of Lincoln pointed out, linking specialist schools to mainstream so there is mutual support. We should be ambitious for our children. All plans should seek to improve outcomes and support transition to adulthood. Now, as the noble Lord Villamora noted, the importance of early identification, which we need to get right. And we need to move away from a legalistic, tribunal-based system. It doesn't help anyone. And while this will require upfront investment to build capacity in mainstream schools and additional specialist support such as speech and language and educational psychologists, and also in specialist schools and colleges, the savings from reducing higher cost placement, transport, legal and others would more than compensate while delivering better outcomes and sustainability. This will enable specialist needs schools and colleges to fulfil their important role as part of positively functioning system. The government's proposals to require all schools to cooperate with local authorities on SEND admission, SEND inclusion and mental health support is a positive first step, but we need to go much further. Thank you.
My Lords, the first thing I must do is remind the House once again of my declared interests. I am President of the British Lecturer Association. I'm Chairman of Microlink PLC, assisted tech company which has had interest in education historically. And, my Lords, this has been a much wider-ranging debate than I was expecting. The Baroness Monckton's original thrust, I felt, was a more specialist part, an important part of this thing, the areas of special educational needs and preparation for adult life. But we have ranged wide here, and to a lot of territory which we have indeed covered from my question this morning, but as it fell. But there is a degree of consensus here, which the Noble Lord Jameson has probably put his finger on very happily here. We have a system which, well, my Lords, I believe in the cock-up school of history, and the idea that you would have a nice, special personal entitlement would deal with the problem has become one which has fed the lawyers and no one else. It's one that meant that the government system has become effectively dependent on the private sector to fulfil some of its needs. We have actually got a big problem here. One of the things that will help, and I don't think I'm disagreeing with anybody here, is early recognition, particularly of the mainstream conditions which there is consensus can be dealt with in most cases within the normal classroom, or at least within supported units in school. Dyslexia undoubtedly fits that, if you allow it to. And the first thing you've got to say here, and this is something of which myself and the Noble Baroness Baron crossed swords upon, though I felt that she was probably doing it with a sword in her own back at the time, was the fact that you have to have flexibility. To allow somebody to succeed, they will learn differently. Dyslexia, we always tend to go to our own little area first. This is very true of the dyslexic. And for instance, I hope that Baroness Smith at some point in the future will be announcing that they have removed the requirement that you can only teach English or English in one way, that is systematic synthetic phonics, which overloads the short-term memory, which means many dyslexics and other groups don't find it a friendly process, and many cannot learn by it. And the fact that we actually equip teachers to give specialists support in different ways, because if you failed once by some teaching process, which the majority do pass by, it means you're not absorbing in that way. So giving you more help in that line is actually just undermining that child further. And we have ways of dealing with it now, technology. My Lords, all of us have in our pockets, I would bet, a device which you can press a button and you can dictate to. True, the AI doesn't quite match up to my vocabulary yet in all occasions, but it's getting there. And there is that available on computers, making sure those are better available. And that means a slight reordering of the classroom, but do you know what? We can do it at university. Indeed, it's a legal requirement at university. So why don't we bring that down and take these bits of knowledge together? My Lords, I think was said here about a system that is lacking being joined up. I have actually spoken about this on so many occasions, my Lords, that many of the veterans of this chamber will probably be able to start quoting me back very quickly. But the fact of the matter is we have to be flexible to allow this to happen. This requires different uses of resources and a capacity within the school system to spot and implement change. This is for most of the most commonly occurring conditions at certain levels. If we get that right, these people stand a chance of getting the skills to progress through to training and other activity. I talk about dyslexia too much because I know about it. I also know I don't know that much about the other groups. But we need a lot of expertise. You will need more expertise than you can provide from one person. The reliance on the Senko has got to be a thing of the past. They might coordinate a group of experts, but they will need more people there, more resource, more knowledge, and the authority to tell that teacher in the class, for instance, once maths and dyslexia. Bad short-term memory means you don't remember equations and formula. That means you can understand a concept, but won't be able to implement it in the classroom tests. Do most maths and physics teachers know that? No. Not because they're essentially evil, but because they haven't been trained. Now, my lords, after I get away from my own particular hobby horse and go back to where the Baroness Monckton actually brought us in, other groups will have different requirements. If you have major problems in attaining life skills or going through people with learning disabilities, for various equations around autism, you will have other requirements that might mean better support. And this is one thing that was actually built into the Education and Healthcare Plan. I didn't think I'd ever say a good word about it, but the idea that support till 25 is a good idea and the concept down there. You will need it for later. How is government going to make sure we continue to give that support and prepare people for actually being able to function as independent adults in later life? Now, there's one thing we often forget about when we're talking about this. The people we're talking about are going to grow up. Let's hope that. They're going to grow up and be able to function as individuals. Technology, approach, flexibility, being told how to ask for help. Even if the institution is prepared to give it, being told how to ask for it is so essential. And we've got to make sure that people are prepared. People learn at different levels and different rates, how they've got this going forward. And my lords, if you want to get a group that will talk to you about this, it is the parents of certain people who live with a little nagging doubt that can grow to a huge fear on their shoulder. What happens to this child as an adult when I'm not there? Think about it. They won't be able to function, they won't be able to go forward, they won't be able to have normal lives. And unless we interact with that fear to support it, we are letting down everybody involved, making sure they are there. And this sector is still driven by the tiger parent. Hopefully, the noble Baroness will be able to announce reforms and changes that will start to stop that. But at the moment it is. And we have so many parents who are worried about the future of their child and whose entire life becomes driven around supporting that child. I hope the noble Baroness will be able to start this process. I don't expect all the answers today, by the way. But if we can actually start this process of engaging with it, because it has been known, none of this should come as a surprise to anybody who's been around this for any length of time. We've got to make sure we have a process where you have support in the education system and indeed training people to ask for help. I mean, the dyslexic, to go back to a group, who won't ask for a spelling test or something, or a place to quietly go away and process something because they think it means weakness. My lords, I've had 2 interns on a personal basis. Both had the disabled students allowance for 2 different reasons. Only once they saw the work I was doing here were they prepared to admit that they actually had this help and they were slightly changing working processes went through. My Lords, I thought I had dyslexic and disabled friendly stamped in the middle of my forehead, and they were still frightened of it. Just think about that. How do we approach this? How do we go forward? How does the Department of Education encourage the other bits of society to become more user-friendly? How do we stop saying, oh, that's a problem that only goes into one place? My Lords, this is a big topic. But remembering that Go lasts a lifetime and the Department of Education is only the first step in that will be a real step forward. And I hope one we hear about the first steps down that line today. Thank you.
My Lords, I'd also like to congratulate my noble friend Baroness Monckton of Dallington Forest for securing this very important debate, and also for the truly dignified way in which she made her remarks and how she combined such practical examples with deep expertise and understanding of this topic. And I think this has been a really excellent and wide-ranging debate. And what we have heard across the House is that every one of your lordships wants an education system that helps all children and young people with special educational needs and disabilities to thrive, to fulfil their potential, and to lead fulfilling lives, whether they're in special schools or whether they're in mainstream education. And we also recognise the important role played by our special colleges, who support young people with special educational needs, both academically, but also to make the transition into more independent living, to reduce isolation, as the noble Baroness Morris of Yardley pointed out, and indeed to remove stigma, as we just heard from the noble Lord, Lord Addington. And we have heard this afternoon, and we knew before we came into the chamber, that this sector faces many challenges, but perhaps the most immediate that we heard in the debate from all of your lordships is the demand for specialist provision, that rising demand, and the pressures that that places on funding. And it was in recognition of this growing need that the last Conservative government increased the high needs budget to £10.5 billion in 2024-25, which was a 60% increase on the figure in 2019-20, and to help increase capacity, £2.6 billion is being invested from 2022 to 25 to fund new specialist places and improve existing provision. And when complete, that investment in special schools will provide an additional 60,000 places. But as we all know, the level of need continues to outstrip that, with real consequences for parents and their children who are looking for a place for their child. And it was the lack of consistent support and outcomes that led to the development of the SEND and Alternative Provision Improvement Plan that we published last year, which was designed to ensure high quality early support for every child, regardless of where they live. And at its core was an attempt to deal with the feeling that too many parents are having to battle with the system to get help, that too many parents have lost trust in the system, and that we are not offering them the confidence that their children can realise their potential, and that the system needs to be on a financially sustainable footing, as my noble friend Lord Jameson said. So there are two key areas within that, so that children can get the right support in the right place at the right time. One is a national system with national standards to deliver a consistent, clear and early support. And secondly, moves to improve the timeliness and quality of education, health and care plans by adopting a standardised and digitised template to deal with some of the burden that we've heard and stress that parents face when they're trying to make those applications. And it would be reassuring if the Noble Baroness, the Minister, could just comment on whether the government plans to continue with those two initiatives, particularly given the level of consultation that underpinned those decisions. But the pressures that we're seeing on special schools, also, many of which we know are operating over capacity, does make the government's proposal to impose VAT on independent schools from the 1st of January 2025 even more misguided. And we know that around 100,000 children and young people without an EHCP receive specialist SEND support in independent schools, and VAT on their fees risks disrupting their education, particularly as it's being brought in partway through the school year. As the Minister knows, on these benches we think the government should drop this policy in its entirety, or at the very least delay it. But there is a particular area that the government, I would suggest, should look at, which is the position of the 130 specialist FE colleges who provide training for young people with complex needs. As the Noble Lady Baroness Wolfe and my noble friend pointed out, that all of their students are publicly funded through the high needs system, and if these colleges are required to charge VAT, the purchasing local authority would simply reclaim it, resulting in no actual financial benefit to the public purse, but considerable bureaucracy, and I would be grateful if the noble lady would consider reviewing that. We know that our special schools and colleges perform a crucial role, but it's also the case that the relationship between special school provision and mainstream provision is important, as we heard in particular from the Right Reverend Prelate, the Bishop of Lincoln. And we are concerned that the demand pressures that have built up in recent years, which were also highlighted in the National Audit Office report today, are leading to other impacts, including a worrying increase in the number of home-educated children with special educational needs. And I know that the Noble Lord Story, who's not in his place, and the Noble Baroness, the Minister, have plans for legislation in this area, and I look forward very much to those debates, and we support the principle that of assuring that all children are receiving a suitable education. More broadly, we look forward to hearing more from the government in the coming months about how they will improve their use of data in this area, also as recommended in the NAO report, in predicting changes in demand for special educational needs and disability provision, and how to build on some of the excellent work which officials had already started to ensure that expansions in capacity are done in the right place. There's one topic which hasn't come up, I think, in your Lordship's debate this afternoon, which is the area of alternative provision. And the last government intentionally brought together our strategy for children with special educational needs and disabilities together with those in alternative provision, given the very high incidence of special educational needs among those children. In fact, my first visit as a minister was to a school near Bristol for children who'd been excluded from school, some as young as 5, and it was clear they needed many things from the system, but two stayed with me, which the first was that for very young children, it seems obvious that these children need a clear route to return back into mainstream education, and that for all children that they should have access to integrated care teams so that all of their wider needs can be met, and again, where possible, they return to mainstream. And my understanding is that there were some encouraging results from the DFE's specialist task force pilot. Only the DFE could come up with that name. where there was a multi-agency response for those children, and I would really encourage the Noble Baroness, the Minister, to consider continuing with that. To conclude, my Lords, there's unity in this House about the desire to ensure the SEND system works better and provides the support and the outcomes that children and young people with special educational needs and disabilities deserves. But I think we're also in agreement that this is one of the hardest areas of policy to get right, although I was encouraged by my noble friend Lord Jameson's remarks in this regard. I would just like to reassure the noble Baroness, the Minister, that in opposition we will work constructively with the government to try and get this right for children and their families.
My Lords, I want, as others have, to start by thanking the noble lady Baroness Monckton for securing this debate on the contribution of special schools and colleges. The noble lady and I did our maiden speeches on the same day, and she has continued, as she did at that point, to be an enormously important advocate, both for the project that she herself leads, but also for children and young people with special educational needs and disabilities. And I'm also grateful for the excellent contributions today from across the House. As the noble Lord Dallington said, there has been a breadth of discussion. There has also been an understandable use of personal experience and an emphasis on the experiences of individual children, because as my noble friend Lady Hazarika said, this is about how we ensure that every child gets the best possible start in life and the best possible opportunities to achieve their potential in life. And that's why we said in our manifesto that we are committed to breaking down barriers to opportunity so that every child, regardless of their background, their family circumstances or their needs, is supported to achieve and thrive. And sadly, that is not happening in our special educational needs and disability system at the moment. We have inherited a system in crisis, as others have identified, a crisis of provision and a crisis of confidence. Outcomes for children and young people are often poor in a system which can be adversarial for parents and for carers to navigate. And this, of course, was reinforced this morning with the publication of the National Audit Office report referenced by the Right Reverend Prelate, the Bishop of Lincoln, who published their report on the SEND system, exposing the full extent of that failure. It reveals a system that has been neglected to the point of crisis and consequently has failed children and families with special educational needs on every measure. And I would also, however, identify that the noble Lord Billamoria, in a broad speech, nevertheless concluded that the one answer was more money. Now, of course, it's important that this area receives the resources it needs, but one of the most worrying things about the National Audit Office report this morning excuse me, was that it identified that the annual budget has risen by 58% in a decade, but it hasn't led to better outcomes for children with special educational needs. So money is not enough in this particular case. And I think that's because, as I thought the noble Lord Jameson very ably spelt out, we have a whole range of pressures and a whole system that is broken, and therefore we need to take a systemic and radical approach to the way in which we think about special educational needs and disabilities. And it is both a cause and an effect that we have seen in recent years a significant surge in demand for SEN support in education, care and education, health and care plans, and in special school placements. The number of children and young people with EHCPs has increased markedly
from 330,000 in 2021-22 to 400,000 by 23-24. And that rise is particularly pronounced among specific need types. So over this period, the number of children and young people with autism recorded as their primary need has grown by 27.9%. Similarly, those with speech, language and communication needs has seen an increase of 36.4%, and those with social, emotional and mental health needs have risen by 25.4%. And those sharp increases highlight the growing pressures on the SEND system. They also, as Noble Lords have identified, demonstrate the need not only for an education-wide response to this, but in fact for a government-wide response where the contribution of health, for example, will also be very important. The government's ambition is that all children and young people with special educational needs and disabilities or in alternative provision receive the right support to succeed in their education and as they move into adult life. And that's why we're committed to taking a community-wide approach, improving inclusivity and expertise in mainstream settings, as well as ensuring that specialist settings cater to those with the most complex needs. My noble friend, Lady Hazarika, talked about the experience of many families and children in mainstream schools where their failure to get the support necessary drives them into this battle for an education, health and care plan. Today we've published independently commissioned insight that suggests that if the system was extensively improved using early intervention and better resourcing in mainstream schools, it could lead to tens of thousands more children and young people having their needs met without an EHCP and having their needs met in a mainstream setting rather than a specialist placement. That's what is at stake here. So we're determined to rebuild families' confidence in a system that so many rely on. There will be no more short-termism when it comes to the life chances of some of our most vulnerable children. We understand how urgently we need to address this, but the reform that families are crying out for will take time. And in response to my noble friend, Baroness Morris, that will obviously mean that there will need to be a further opportunity to debate in this House, yes, but also across the country with the families, the children, those who are supporting them, also having the opportunity to take part in that debate. And my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, is absolutely determined to engage widely as we do this. The Noble Lord Farmer, I think, made a very important contribution in talking about the role of parents, their significance for the support they provide to their children, the crucial relationship that they need to have with the schools, and of course their contribution to the debate. And their voices and their concerns must be heard as we take forward systemic reform in this area. But we also understand that people are impatient, and we have already taken several steps to deliver on this vision. We've restructured the Department for Education with much more focus on support for children and young people with SEND as part of our schools provision. The part of the department that does the core work on SEND and alternative provision has moved into the schools group, so it sits under the schools minister and the schools director general, so it's being considered as a central component of that wider schools work, such as school standards, curriculum and assessment, and the operation of the education system as a whole. We've begun the work to address the serious workforce challenge facing the school system. We're recruiting an additional 6,500 teachers while providing support to areas facing specific recruitment challenges. We're investing over £21 million this year to train 400 additional educational psychologists, ensuring better support and education for our young people. And the Noble Lord Billamoria and others, and the Noble Lord Addington, rightly emphasise the need for early intervention and identification. And we're similarly determined, therefore, that the early years sector receives the support it needs to grow and to develop further skills. And in September this year, the department published a new free online training module and SEND assessment guidance and resources for early educators aimed at supporting children with developmental differences and with special educational needs and disabilities. In the new core schools budget grant in July, we provided special and alternative provision schools with over £140 million of extra funding to help with the extra costs of this year's Teachers' Pay Award and the outcome of the pay increase negotiations for support staff. This is really important to support the recruitment, retention and development of dedicated staff, specialist staff and support staff, ensuring that they continue to play that crucial role in providing high-quality education and care for pupils with SEND. And special schools and colleges employ a high proportion, as my noble friend Lady Morris said, a high proportion of such support staff. They play a critical role in the education of the children and young people with the most complex needs, building that team around the child that is so crucial. We also know how vital it is that all of our children have strong speech and language skills. That's why this government will roll out early language interventions to make sure that all of our children get support at the earliest possible point, including continuing the support for the 11,100 schools registered for the Nuffield Early Language Intervention Programme, because it's so important that we make a difference when our children are young. The Noble Lord Addington also talked about the contribution of technology support for pupils with SEND. With rapid improvements in the accessibility features built into standard devices, schools now have more access to assistive technology than ever before, and evidence shows that when used effectively, it is a key component of high-quality teaching for pupils with SEND, and the government's committed to helping teachers use technology to support their students with SEND, and we're embedding evidence-based practice and broadening the effective use of assistive technology through research, training and guidance. My noble friend Lady Morris and the noble Lord Addington also absolutely rightly talked about the importance of the curriculum and of assessment for how we support children and young people with special educational needs and disabilities. And in launching the Independent Curriculum and Assessment Review, chaired by Professor Becky Francis, we've been clear that the review will look closely at the barriers to progress and how we can achieve good outcomes specifically for those with special educational needs and disabilities. And last month, the review launched a call for evidence, which will give stakeholders in the SEND sector an opportunity to have their say on the curriculum and assessment system, including what currently works well and where things could be improved. Several noble lords have talked about the importance of preparing children and young people for adulthood, and that has to be at the heart of the SEND system. We know that with the right support, the vast majority of young people with SEND are capable of sustained, paid employment, full lives, and should be supported to achieve this outcome. To help with this, we are supporting schools and colleges to work in line with the Gatsby benchmarks to address individual needs and to raise career aspirations. The noble Lady Monckton particularly raised the issue about how we can ensure that young people with SEND are able to access apprenticeships. I strongly agree with her about that. We have already expanded the flexibility of English and maths requirements for apprentices with learning difficulties or disabilities, allowing those without an EHCP but facing barriers to achieving level 2 qualifications to complete entry level 3 instead. We're also investing £18 million to March next year to double the number of supported internships, and we're testing this model with young people to support even more young people to achieve and thrive and transition into employment. But I take her point about further flexibility in the apprenticeship programme, and I will certainly reflect carefully on that. In thinking about further education, it is of course the case that there are lots of general further education colleges which are doing very good work in the area of special educational needs. But for young people whose needs can't be met in general further education colleges, specialist post-16 institutions do play an integral role in providing that specialist further education provision. And in 2024-25, there were 118 of those institutions with students receiving high needs funding. It's also worth saying that young people with SEND who choose to progress to university should also continue to access high quality support. As of the most recent data, almost a fifth of English higher education students had a disability. And under the Equality Act, all HE providers have got a responsibility to make reasonable adjustments for their disabled students, and the Office for Students requires registered HE providers to take all reasonable steps to ensure that students are supported. And of course, in their access and participation plans, providers must also outline how they will improve opportunity for underrepresented groups, including disabled students, to access, succeed in and progress from higher education. Ultimately, we want more children and young people to receive the support they need to thrive in their local mainstream setting, reducing the need for them to travel a long way to access a specialist placement, enabling them to learn, as several noble lords have said, alongside their friends. Many mainstream settings are already going above and beyond to deliver specialist provision locally, including through resourced provision and SEN units. But there will also always be a place in the system for special schools and colleges for children with the most complex needs. And as we've heard today, special schools and specialist post-16 colleges make an invaluable contribution to the education of nearly 200,000 learners, supporting them to achieve and thrive. Their staff work tirelessly to support children and young people, and I'd like to take this opportunity to thank them for their dedication, and also to recognise the point of my noble friend Lady Morris about how the range of staff and the skills that exist in specialist schools and colleges can indeed inform teachers in all of our schools. And as the Right Reverend Prelate, the Bishop of Lincoln, said, that role of staff and, where possible, that co-location can enable everybody to benefit, because specialist staff across schools and colleges play a fundamental role in educating children and young people with SEND and supporting their preparation for adulthood. We've also seen some really positive partnerships between specialist and mainstream colleges that enhance the educational experience for children and young people with SEND. For example, Orchard Hill College and Crawley College have collaborated to support learners with complex health needs, enabling them to access mainstream courses with tailored care plans. Similarly, New Friars College and Newcastle and Staffordshire Colleges Group are working together to create new supported internships and work placement opportunities open to students from both settings. Those are the types of partnerships that enable the very best specialist understanding, staff and provision to be shared for all to use. The noble lady Baroness Wolfe talked about other specialist colleges, and I take her point about the need for us to have a view about how more broadly specialist colleges need to be organised and to contribute to the system, and I will certainly take that point away, take up the challenge to look at that provision. Several noble lords once again took the opportunity to raise the issue of VAT on independent schools. Can I reiterate, as I have said on every single occasion, that, of course, the local authority funding already supports the vast majority of pupils with EHCP plans that attend independent schools, and they will not be impacted by the introduction of VAT on private schools, and in next week in the budget, the tax information and impact note will include the impact on special educational needs, and I can assure noble lords and the noble Lady Baroness Wolfe and others that the Treasury has been considering how VAT might apply to post-16 institutions, and the government will publish the results of that consultation soon. For too long, the education system has not met the needs of all children and young people, including those with special educational needs and disability. Educational outcomes for children and young people are too poor after years when councils and parents have been pitted against each other. Special schools and specialist colleges such as Team Domenica make an enormous contribution to the education and care of thousands of children and young people, helping them to learn, achieve and prepare for adulthood. We will work to restore parents' trust that their child will get the support they need in a mainstream setting if that is the right place for them. And there will always be a place in specialist settings for children and young people with the most complex needs. That is central to improving the life chances of children and young people across the country, and I look forward to working with noble lords to make that vision a reality.
Yeah. My lords, thank you very much, all of you who've participated in this debate. I particularly want to thank the noble Baroness Morris for pointing out that special schools have improved. It's something that, you know, when you're mired in it, it's a very difficult thing to remember. And also that we have come a long way since we used ineducable. Very, very important. But also for pointing out that the assessment framework, the exams taken, need to focus much more on purpose to get people into work. And that does need to be looked at, but thank you for pointing that out. My noble friend Lord Farmer, just for saying that parents should never be forgotten. I mean, parents are absolutely key. And if you don't have the parents on board, it's very difficult to do what is necessary for the young people. They really need to be on side, and they need to be looked after, because as Baroness, the noble Baroness Hazarika said, they are absolutely exhausted most of the time. And I speak as one. It really is very, very tiring a lot of the time. I'd like to thank the Right Reverend Prelate, the Bishop of Lincoln, for really the most important phrase, I think, of the debate, the rare dignity of all people. That's what it is. And when you are sitting, and also I think what Baroness Morris said about social mobility, when you're with somebody with a learning disability, they don't care who you are, they don't know who you are, they don't care what you earn, where you come from. And what it makes you do is strip off mask after mask after mask until you are there in a proper shared humanity. That's what it means. I'm not going to go on because I've never done this before, but I just want to thank you all very much indeed for all your contributions, and I'm very grateful.
The question is that this motion be agreed to. As many of that opinion will say content. Contrary not content, the contents have it.
I beg to move that the House do now adjourn.
The House do now adjourn.